Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump discusses the Russia-Ukraine war with the leaders of both countries. After two separate phone calls, Trump said negotiations on ending the war will start immediately. Iris Tao at the White House. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says the U.S. is against Ukraine joining NATO. He also suggests that Kyiv will have to take some losses to close a peace deal with Russia. Former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard confirmed as the nation's intelligence chief. Only one Republican senator voted against her. An atmospheric river is approaching Southern California, with forecasters predicting the heaviest rainfall of the season. Officials also warned of increased danger in burn-scar areas due to the incoming rain. The Justice Department suing the state of New York over its immigration policies. Among the defendants are Governor Kathy Hochul and State Attorney General Letitia James. Jack Bradley has the details of Attorney General Pam Bondi's announcement.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. We open with President Trump's latest moves today. He spoke over the phone with both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy about ending the war.
In a statement on Truth Social Wednesday, President Trump said he had a lengthy and highly productive phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Trump said he and Putin discussed the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, and both wanted to stop the killing taking place in Ukraine. Trump wrote, quote, "We have also agreed to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately." The White House provided more details.
I can also confirm that the president just recently got off the phone with President Zelenskyy of Ukraine. His truth is as follows. I just spoke to President Zelenskyy of Ukraine. The conversation went very well. He, like President Putin, wants to make peace. We discussed a variety of topics having to do with the war, but mostly the meeting that is being set up on Friday in Munich, where Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio will lead the delegation.
Trump wrote, quote, "I am hopeful that the results of that meeting will be positive. It is time to stop this ridiculous war where there has been massive and totally unnecessary death and destruction." Zelenskyy also commented on the phone call with Trump.
The conversation was long. We discussed many nuances, diplomatic, military, economic, and President Trump informed me of what Putin told him. We believe that America's power is enough to, together with us, together with all partners, pressure Russia and Putin towards peace.
The Kremlin also commented on the phone call. They said Putin and Trump had agreed to meet, and Putin had invited Trump to visit Moscow. Trump suggested that they're likely to meet first in Saudi Arabia.
Also today, American schoolteacher Mark Vogel got a flag-waving welcome from President Trump. Vogel was freed by Russia after 3.5 years in prison. He landed in the U.S. late last night after a flight home from Moscow. Vogel, with an American flag draped around his shoulders, said, quote, "I feel like the luckiest man on earth right now." Vogel's release came as Trump seeks to improve relations with Moscow. Trump said Vogel's release could be a big, important part of ending the war in Ukraine. And this afternoon, the White House also announced that at least one American was released from detention from Belarus, adding that the individual wants to remain private. Joining us live now with more information is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. The president also spoke this afternoon from the Oval Office. Tell us more about what he said.
Sure. So President Trump today was there during the swearing-in ceremony for Tulsi Gabbard as the United States Director of National Intelligence, and he opened it up to reporters and took some questions. Well, of course, a lot of attention on his conversations with both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, both happening today. And on Ukraine, President Trump says that he does not think it's practical to have Ukraine join NATO, adding that he thinks it's unlikely that Ukraine will return to its 2014 borders. And his comments comes after Defense Secretary Peter Hegseth actually told NATO this morning that he too thinks it's, quote, unrealistic for Ukraine to return to its 2014 borders, adding that the U.S. will shift its focus and priorities to now countering China, specifically to deter a war with China in the Pacific area. And also, President Trump also talked more about his going forward conversations with Putin, saying that he, after calling him today, of course, talking on the phone today, they will ultimately expect to meet, adding that they're going to meet probably in Saudi Arabia. And so, of course, a lot of attention on where and when exactly that conversation and potentially in-person meeting will happen. The White House today saying that nothing they can announce yet on their schedule. And meanwhile, on domestic policies, President Trump today, from his remarks, also touched on, for example, the court cases and the court injunction orders against his actions in recent days. The White House today said that there's been at least over a dozen such injunction orders against the Trump administration during the past 2 weeks, calling it a continuation of weaponization of the justice system against President Trump. And Trump today, again, criticizing courts for, quote, slowing down his slashing of federal government, adding that they can find $1 trillion and, of course, waste, but they're being hindered by courts where and they file in certain courts where it's very hard to win. He added that he has to follow the law, but he will appeal and ultimately try to do what he's seeking to do. And of course, on slashing the federal government, Trump today also said that he wants the education department to be closed immediately. And aside from these, we also know that there will be some important moments happening tomorrow on Thursday. President Trump says he will hold a press conference to talk about what he calls tremendous fraud in the federal government. And also, he also previewed that he might announce the reciprocal tariffs that he has been talking about either later today or tomorrow morning. Back to you, Tiff.
All right, Iris, thanks for those updates. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is in Brussels today, saying Ukraine should not join the NATO alliance. He's the first official of the new Trump administration to visit the NATO headquarters. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has more on his trip.
The bloodshed must stop, and this war must end.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says the U.S. wants to end the fighting in Ukraine. In opening remarks at a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, the Defense Secretary suggests Ukraine will have to take some losses in order to close a peace deal with Russia.
We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective.
He says the goal of returning to pre-2014 borders in Ukraine was, quote, illusionary. Hegseth also talked about Ukraine's NATO ambitions.
The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops.
He added that peacekeepers in Ukraine should be deployed only as a non-NATO mission. The defense secretary also made clear that no U.S. troops would go to Ukraine. Also on Wednesday, the U.S. Treasury Secretary met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in Kyiv.
This is my first official trip abroad, and it should be a strong signal that the war is a top priority for the Trump administration.
President Trump says he wants Ukraine to use its rare earth minerals as a guarantee it will pay back the money the U.S. has sent. This way, the U.S. might also continue sending military aid. Zelenskyy on Wednesday told reporters that the U.S. had presented a first draft of an agreement.
We believe that it provides the further guarantees for the Ukraine people of American assistance.
The document is scheduled to be presented at the Munich Security Conference later this week. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
Turning now to the conflict in the Middle East, will Hamas delay the next hostage release? If the group doesn't release more by Saturday, the ceasefire deal will fall apart. Family members of 6 American hostages on Capitol Hill today sharing their stories. NTD's Melina Weisskopf reports.
35 of the 76 hostages in Gaza are believed to be dead. 6 Americans are among those still held captive. Family members of those American hostages pleaded with U.S. officials today to bring home their beloved ones.
Since then, my family, like so many other families, are tormented by our imagination of what Guy is enduring. While Guy is subjected to physical and sexual abuse, we are also psychologically tortured by Hamas' sick games.
45 Americans were murdered on October 7. 45 Americans. Where is the outrage? This is a big terrorist attack on Americans as well, not just on Israel.
One woman who survived Hamas's capture shared what it was like to be held captive in Gaza.
For 50 days, they make sure I could not escape. They told us all the time that we are going to be hostage for 5 or even 10 years. We are all humans with the same rights. We all have family waiting here. Why I'm different, why I'm here, but no.
The Congressional Roundtable comes as the Israel-Hamas ceasefire hangs in the balance. Hamas claims Israel broke the terms of the deal and has threatened to delay the hostage release scheduled for this Saturday.
If Hamas does not return our hostages by Saturday noon, the ceasefire will end, and the IDF will return to intense fighting until Hamas is completely defeated.
As far as I'm concerned, if all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time. I would say cancel it and all bets are off and let hell break out.
Trump is continuing his plans to take control of the Gaza Strip to rebuild. Now he's trying to get nearby countries to temporarily host Palestinians. Later this month, Egypt will hold an emergency Arab summit to further discuss the new proposal. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
The Senate voted this morning to confirm Tulsi Gabbard as the Director of National Intelligence. This after Democrats ran out the clock debating the nomination.
Ms. Gabbard is a patriot. She's someone who's motivated by service. And she's been serving her country and community since she was 21 years old when she was elected to the Hawaii State Legislature. And after her first session in the Hawaii Legislature, she enlisted in the Army National Guard.
But there are certain times you have to buck and stand up and say, no, this is just a very bad choice for America. And the nomination of Ms. Gabbard is simply one of those. I plead with my colleagues, I know it's the last minute, to think twice, to vote no, as we all will vote.
Despite Democratic opposition and after 30 hours of debate with 52 votes in favor and 48 against, Gabbard was confirmed. Former Senate Leader Mitch McConnell voted against the confirmation. He was the only Republican defector. Gabbard, a former Democratic congresswoman and veteran, is Trump's 14th nominee to be confirmed since January 20th. Also today, the Senate advanced Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s nomination to head the Department of Health and Human Services. The Senate voted 53 to 47 along party lines today to limit debate on Kennedy's nomination. A final confirmation vote could take place in the coming days. Kennedy also faced fierce opposition from Democratic senators, primarily over his positions on vaccines. If confirmed, Kennedy would head the nation's top health agency that oversees agencies such as the FDA and the CDC. While Los Angeles is still recovering from recent wildfires, heavy rain is on the way, with burn-scar areas at heightened risk. Officials are urging residents to stay vigilant as the storm moves in. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
Light rain began falling across metro Los Angeles and Southern California on Wednesday as a powerful storm system moves in, with rain expected through the night. The storm is forecast to deliver between 1.5 and 3 inches of rain throughout the Los Angeles area. LA County Public Works Director Mark Pastrella gave an update at a press conference Wednesday.
We expect more intense rain to begin occurring tomorrow mid-morning and get the most intense portion of this rain right now forecast is in the later part of the afternoon into the evening of Thursday and through Thursday morning into Friday.
He warned that residents in burn-scar areas face heightened risks.
It does present a higher risk to our residents particularly those that are living within the burn scar areas, not only Palisades and Eaton Fire area, but any burn scar area within the last year.
LA County Sheriff Robert Luna reassured the public that additional personnel are ready for deployment.
Our search and rescue teams, volunteers on patrol, and incident management teams have all placed on standby, along with our Air Rescue 5 helicopter crew. Deputies are prepared to assist our community members with humanitarian needs such as food, water, and essentials. They are helping residents prepare with sandbags and passing out mud and debris safety tips.
Homeless outreach teams are also working to relocate unsheltered residents from flood-prone areas. 2 disaster recovery centers, including one at UCLA Research Park and another in Altadena, are open daily from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. to assist affected residents. Supervisor Lindsay Horvath said crews have reinforced flood channels and basins and are ready for canyon roads and PCH, urging residents to stay vigilant. The National Weather Service issued a flash flood watch through Thursday evening. With the rain ahead, Los Angeles is gearing up for Phase 2 of debris removal for damaged homes. To combat exploitation, authorities have announced stricter penalties for price gouging.
Yesterday, our board took additional action to affirm our decision, increasing the penalties for price gouging up to $50,000 and enhancing our enforcement. We don't want anyone being preyed upon during this very difficult time.
She says this will be effective countywide. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Coming up, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene leads the first ever hearing of the House Doge Subcommittee. This amid growing tensions between Doge and congressional Democrats. Luis Martinez reports from Capitol Hill. And it's the Fed chair's second day testifying before Congress. Jason Blair has the latest when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The House Subcommittee on Delivering on Government Efficiency held its first hearing this Wednesday amid growing tensions between the Department of Government Efficiency and congressional Democrats. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene was selected by Speaker of the House Mike Johnson to chair the newly created subcommittee on delivering on government efficiency. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Republican from Georgia, highlighted the bipartisan nature and mission of this subcommittee.
This is not a Democrat problem. This is not a Republican problem. This is an American problem. Over the next decade, total interest payments are projected to be $13.8 trillion.
House Democrats charged House Republicans with being complicit in what they called the hacking of the U.S. federal payment system by Elon Musk.
Congressman, is there anything right now that the subcommittee might be working on where Democrats want to pitch in and also cut in these savings?
Well, we'd love to talk about efficiency. I mean, everyone is interested in government efficiency. This is not government efficiency. This is actually just cutting programs, cutting benefits. There are actually ways of saving resources and saving money. One of those ways is not to give billionaires a huge tax cut.
House Republican spending hawks believe that the work of the Department of Government Efficiency led by Elon Musk is critical in tandem with the new subcommittee on delivering on government efficiency.
Democrats are calling what Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency is doing a constitutional crisis. What would be your response to that?
I'd say we got a spending crisis. They're just, as I've stated, the gravy train's on biscuit wheels, and it's getting ready to run off the track. The gravy spigot's about to turn off, and you're going to see a lot of members of Congress squealing.
House Republicans highlighted abuse, fraud, and waste in government spending as the main mission of this subcommittee.
And lastly, Congressman, what do you think the subcommittee should focus on first?
Medicaid's a great spot. We just identified $200 billion in savings. That's a great place to start.
It's worth mentioning that House Republicans unveiled this Wednesday their budget resolution to kickstart the reconciliation process. In this budget resolution, House Republicans outlined at least $2 trillion in government spending cuts. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Just yesterday, President Trump and Elon Musk defended the work of Doge. With a spending overhaul on the horizon, the administration says Doge is aiming to cut $2 trillion from the federal budget. NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from the people about this plan.
Doge is now looking to cut $2 trillion off the federal budget. So do you think it's a bit of a long shot, or do you think it's doable?
Well, I think it's going to be difficult because there'll be a lot of ramifications to it, but I think it's long overdue that we take a clear look at where we're spending money, how we're spending money, because it seems like this process has been going on for 60 years without anybody really taking a close look at it.
I think it's doable, but I don't think it's doable without cutting healthcare costs or defense costs, which seems pretty sacrosanct right now.
I think there's a lot of wish in the government, and I think we need to look at it and reduce government spending.
It's not a long shot, and it's definitely not doable. We had these systems in place for actually decades, and then you want to change it up at the last minute is sabotage, if you ask me.
They're finding processes that have been in place since 1955, and so people that are still carrying paper that has been filled out by a human being down to another place where it's processed by a human being, even if they get to $1 trillion, if they get to 500 billion of waste and anything else, and I think it'll serve the country well.
Elon Musk yesterday was at the White House with President Trump, and then he was saying that the very idea of Doge is to tackle unelected bureaucrats who, for some reason, have more powers than our elected officials.
And I understand how people would say that he's unelected, but it is true that Congress has the person, is supposed to be the organization that spends the money, but let's be realistic about it. There are all kinds of people who are unelected who have tremendous power in spending our federal tax dollars.
I got something against it because he's not even an elected official, and he's coming up with all these programs like going inside OPM and firing the EPA, firing all these. Look, the accident we had with the FFA.
I do think there needs to be accountability and for all the bureaucrats too need to be held accountable.
It's a federal government. It is a bureaucracy. How do you think things get done? If you cut jobs of people who work in the government won't work.
I think what he was talking about is returning any sort of major regulation or major change. It has to be voted on by the Senate, by the Congress. Whether the Dems or the Republicans are controlling, there's nothing wrong with returning those kind of decisions to the people.
8 U.S. inspectors general have filed a lawsuit challenging President Trump's decision to fire them. The lawsuit was filed today in federal court in Washington. It asks a judge to declare the firings unlawful and restore the inspectors general to their positions at the agencies. The inspectors general are independent watchdogs who act as a check on abuse and mismanagement. The president can remove the inspectors general, but the Trump administration did not give Congress the 30-day notice required by law. Trump has fired at least 17 inspectors general as part of his pledge to reshape and overhaul the federal government. Trump says he will put new good people in the jobs. The White House did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The Federal Reserve in the hot seat for a second day on Capitol Hill, this time in front of the House Financial Committee. Fed Chair Jerome Powell was questioned on the national debt and inflation. NTD correspondent Jason Blair brings us the details.
It's the second day for Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell testifying in front of Congress, this time in front of the House, for the Fed's semi-annual report to Congress. Inflation and debt were up for discussion. Representative Norman asked Mr. Powell what he thought about the nation's long-term debt situation.
We're on an unsustainable path, and the debt level isn't unsustainable, but the path is sustainable, and certainly it's past time for Congress to work on that. But that's what I can say. I can't say more than that.
And inflation hit 3%. That's according to the latest data by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This also came up in the hearing.
We're close, but not there on inflation. And you did see today's inflation print, which says the same thing. I mean, we've made great progress toward 2%. Last year, inflation was 2.6%. So great progress, but we're not quite there yet.
President Trump said that he thinks the interest rates should be lowered and that it would go hand in hand with tariffs. Mr. Powell was asked about this statement by Rep. Sherman, whether this statement by the president or any other elected official would influence the Fed's actions. And Powell responded with a pretty decisive no. Again, Chair Powell did pretty much repeat what he said in the Senate, that the Fed is in no hurry to adjust interest rates.
We know that reducing policy restraint too fast or too much could hinder progress on inflation. At the same time, reducing policy restraint too slowly or too little could unduly weaken economic activity and employment.
And Rep. Sherman also asked Mr. Powell if across-the-board tariffs would increase the cost of living. Mr. Powell responded saying that he didn't want to speculate and the Fed would wait until the exact policy information came out to make any comment. Reporting on Capitol Hill, Jason Blair, NTD News.
Coming up, Tulsi Gabbard is now at the helm of America's vast intelligence community. A retired senior intelligence officer joins us to discuss her confirmation and the agency she'll be overseeing. The Justice Department suing the state of New York over its immigration policies. The defendants include Governor Kathy Hochul and State Attorney General Letitia James. Jack Bradley has the details of Attorney General Pam Bondi's announcement. And the U.S. getting serious about buying Greenland. Senators today discussing the territory's strategic importance. The highlights from that hearing after the break. Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here's some today's top headlines. President Trump spoke over the phone with both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Trump said negotiations on ending the war in Ukraine will begin this Friday at the Munich Security Conference. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth also addressed the Russia-Ukraine war during a NATO meeting in Brussels. He said that NATO membership for Ukraine was unrealistic and suggested Ukraine should abandon hopes of winning all its territory back from Russia. Tulsi Gabbard was sworn in as Director of National Intelligence shortly after the Senate confirmed her, largely along party lines. Senator Mitch McConnell was the only Republican who voted against her. Joining us now to discuss the confirmation of Gabbard and the U.S. intelligence community is Nicholas Eftimiadis, retired senior intelligence officer and author of Chinese Espionage Operations and Tactics. Nick, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. Now, first, Gabbard has worn a lot of hats. A military veteran, a former congresswoman, and even a former presidential candidate. What do you think she'll bring to her new role as the nation's top intelligence director?
Well, there are a lot of things that each candidate would bring to the role. In her case, certainly first and foremost is trust of the president. And in that role, you couldn't have a more critical factor than having the president's trust. So she has that. Secondly, she is rather committed, and you can hear this in her testimony, towards the protection of civil rights and privacy rights within the United States. So she is going to ensure that intelligence community follows the rules and behaves in a way appropriate for U.S. intelligence. And lastly, I would say that she is she understands some of the strategic threats that present us today, China and Russia in particular. And she knows that these are going to be issues that are going to be first and foremost priorities for the intelligence community.
I want to get to the foreign threats, but first on your second point, Senator Lisa Murkowski, who was initially holding out, said she decided to support Gabbard due to her promise to narrow the scope of the intel community to ensure the safety and civil liberties of Americans. What actions do you see Gabbard taking to follow through on that?
Well, that's going to be interesting. I think I know she wants to hit the ground running, but I think in the first couple of months, she's going to have to understand the playing field a little more. I think we're going to be looking at a new inspector general. I think we're going to be looking at reviews of operations. I think we're going to be looking at in some cases, if appropriate, the cleaning of house. So I think she's going to get her hands on the bureaucracy first. And as she does that, I think she's going to put in specific measures relative to oversight of intelligence operations, oversight of targeting, maintenance of records, and all the other things that potentially an intelligence agency can do to be weaponized or to just be a threat to the U.S. population.
Now, critics are pointing to Gabbard's past, such as past comments sympathetic to Edward Snowden and past public support for Russia. Now, given her confirmation was mostly along party lines, do you think there's legitimate concerns over some of these issues?
I think everybody's past changes the minute they get selected for a nomination. I don't think there are issues. Look, she's going to do what the president wants. I mean, that much has been very clear in virtually every candidate that's come up for nomination, that they're going to execute the will of the presidency. And so, there are a lot of there are a lot of personal opinions that go on in this. Doesn't mean that they're going to be influencing or in any way her performance in that role. So no, I don't see those as an issue at all, really. Every candidate has come to the table with some quote that was thrown at them 4 years ago or 5 years ago. And, the circumstances were different. The context was different. The knowledge base on that person's part was different. So I don't see that as a real issue to her functioning.
Now, to one of your earlier points, how do you see Gabbard and the agency more broadly tackling the threats of Chinese espionage and intelligence operations on U.S. soil?
Well, that's going to be an extraordinary challenge. I mean, as a system, as a government, we're not built for that, really. We the political warfare that China executes, we're not built to work against. The cyber attacks that China has done, absolutely relentless in volume and levels of penetration, we're not built to handle. So a little bit of restructuring is going to be in order. We're going to have to use, and she's going to have to use, a whole of government approach, with other agencies in order to be able to respond to that and to protect the United States. I mean, just clearly, we're at this point outclassed. The only thing that we have going for us is the fact that there are a lot of people in the intelligence community concerned about this, and everybody is basically flocking to jobs that have to deal with China.
Now, to your point, the latest report from research group MITRE says that the intel community is not well positioned to tackle the full spectrum of threats from the Chinese regime. What actions do you think the new DNA has to take to address this issue, or, what suggestions would you have for them?
Well, it takes time. We have a lot of what they call one book wonders. I mean, the intelligence community is getting smarter, but there's not a lot of depth of experience. We had thousands of people who were trained as Soviet, area experts during the course of the Cold War. So that's going to take a little time. Building expertise is one. Number two is working cross-coordination. Between agencies, they have to work together because, China strikes on so many different fronts. And number three, and I can't say this, with enough emphasis, that we've got to get a national strategy, not just in the intelligence community, but throughout commerce and U.S. Trade Rep and Security and Exchange Commission and the intelligence community and the Defense Department. I mean, all these have to be interlinked into one national strategy to be able to contend with China's assertiveness across multiple fronts.
Now, on the issue of trust, do you see the likes of Gabbard and now John Ratcliffe with the CIA helping to increase the public's trust in the intel community, given the, say, 51 so-called spies who lied over the Hunter Biden laptop or reports of weaponization in the agency?
Well, that's going to be interesting. I think the public trust will increase over time, but it is going to be difficult. I mean, their job is going to be immensely difficult because trust, once lost, takes a very long time to build back. So, I mean, that's in people's person-to-person relationships, and certainly within, with the government and the citizenry. So, I think they can make gains, but I think it's going to take time, and they need to be at it and keep pushing at it. And the release of documents that they're doing is going to be a first step. There are going to be a few painful months ahead as documents are released, but after that time, we should begin a healing process.
Nicholas Eftimiadis, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi just announced a new lawsuit against the state of New York for having laws that protect illegal immigrants from arrest. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
Attorney General Pam Bondi announced on Wednesday that the Justice Department is suing New York over its so-called sanctuary city laws, which prevents law enforcement from arresting illegal immigrants. Bondi says that the DOJ filed the suit against the state of New York, Governor Kathy Hochul, Attorney General Letitia James, and State DMV Commissioner Mark Schroeder. Bondi criticized New York's green light laws, saying that they prevent law enforcement from accessing an individual's immigration status.
New York has chosen to prioritize illegal aliens over American citizens. It stops today. Millions of illegal aliens with violent records have flooded into our communities, bringing violence and deadly drugs with them.
The DOJ filed a similar lawsuit last week against the state of Illinois for such sanctuary city laws. And in announcing the lawsuit on Wednesday, Bondi was joined by the mother of Kayla Hamilton, a 20-year-old who was raped and killed by an illegal immigrant, an MS-13 gang member from El Salvador.
And he had a criminal record in 2020 in El Salvador for illicit gang activity. He came over as an unoccupied alien child, saying that he was afraid of gang activity in his country. Health and Human Services called him a nice boy, and he showed age-appropriate behavior. That fell so wrong when he murdered my daughter.
Last week, Bondi ordered the DOJ to pause all funds to sanctuary cities. Now, it's not clear how long the pause is, but in the meantime, the DOJ is reviewing any contracts in those cities that may break the law. Federal law prohibits state and local governments from blocking immigration officers from accessing individual citizenship status. But several sanctuary cities have policies that restrict local authorities from cooperating with federal immigration officers, and Bondi ordered the DOJ to investigate such incidents. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
The U.S. government getting serious about buying Greenland. At a Senate hearing this morning, experts told lawmakers there's a lot at stake in the Arctic. Here's the story.
The United States acquiring Greenland.
Serious discussion is underway for the United States to buy Greenland. At a Senate hearing Wednesday, lawmakers and experts discussed what's at stake.
Russia and China are both increasing their military presence in the Arctic. They want to be able to control the sea lanes, block freedom of navigation of our commercial and shipping and our military.
Senator Maria Cantwell says that Arctic ice is melting, which may create vital new shipping lanes that could decrease transit times by over 2 weeks. She said it's vital for the U.S. to have a strong presence in those waters, as well as a strong presence at Greenland's resources.
Greenland sits atop vast reserves of rare earth elements, materials critical for everything from technology to national defense.
Senator Ted Cruz says controlling those minerals would reduce the world's dependence on China, which has a virtual monopoly on rare earth minerals. But experts say it's not just about economic security, but also physical security. Geographically speaking, Greenland and the U.S. are relatively close, about a 4-hour flight.
Foreign vessels have repeatedly arrived in Greenlandic waters without proper authorization or in violation of NATO protocols. In one instance, a Russian submarine actually showed up.
Arctic expert Alexander Gray says Denmark, which owns Greenland, has failed to keep Greenland secure, and the U.S. may need to step in. Other reasons Greenland is important: a potential source of significant hydropower, good views near the poles for satellites which need ground stations in the Arctic, undersea infrastructure like telecommunications cables and pipelines. Gray also says the U.S. doesn't have to buy Greenland, which it's tried to do 4 times already. Instead, America could offer an international agreement called a Compact of Free Association.
Sovereignty by Greenland would be maintained. At the same time, the United States would have a defense obligation and defense access.
Compacts of free association first appeared during the decolonization period of the 20th century. The U.S. already has a compact of free association with the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, and Palau.
Coming up in the NFL, is Travis Kelce contemplating retirement? The Chiefs tight end seemed to reverse course on his thoughts for next season. Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on right now, but let's start in the NFL as Travis Kelce, who previously sounded like he was coming back next season, seemed unsure when asked in his New Heights podcast released today.
Yeah, that's a podcast that he and his brother host, of course, Jason, a former Philadelphia Eagle. But I want to highlight one of the things he said, actually. Quote, as you see yourself or not feel yourself have the success you once had, it's a tough pill to swallow. For that not to be there in the biggest moments, knowing your team's counting on you, those are all extremely hard things. It's just a tough reality. So he sounded a lot different on this podcast that he did leading up to the Super Bowl, where he seemed like he was definitely coming back for 2025. Maybe his performance or the team's performance, of course, they got blown out in that Super Bowl. He didn't have a great game, 4 catches for 39 yards. Really, the whole offense obviously had trouble against Philadelphia. But I mean, in this past season, he actually also set lows for for receiving yards and receiving touchdowns in a season. But actually, it was still a good season. I mean, he was picked with the Pro Bowl for the 10th straight season. He is 35 years old, though, so we will have to stay tuned for his decision, maybe coming up this spring.
Well, in some younger ages, looking at college sports, the Department of Education announced they're reversing a memo that was issued by former President Biden last month that told universities that their NIL payments, quote, must be made proportionally available to male and female athletes. What was their reasoning here?
Yeah, the Trump administration said Biden's guidance had no legal basis under Title IX, which forbids sex discrimination in education. Now, this is related to that $20 million yearly NIL pool that schools will be allowed to pay their athletes starting next season, not the individual amounts that college athletes, can earn outside of that. I think it's a commonly held belief, though, that a majority of that $20 million is going to be earmarked by schools for the sports that generate the most revenue, which is football and men's basketball. But even the whole issue of schools paying their athletes is still based on a legal settlement that has not yet been approved. Now, a final hearing is set for actually April 7th, so we should know more at that time.
Well, shifting gears to baseball, spring training starts today with pitchers and catchers reporting. What do you see as some of the biggest storylines for this season?
I think for one is, can the Dodgers repeat as champions? I mean, if it's possible, they look like they've gotten even better in this offseason. Their biggest question mark last year was their pitching rotation. They significantly upgraded this offseason. I mean, they signed two-time Cy Young winner Blake Snell, plus a top international free agent Roki Sasaki, who's now considered the top prospect in baseball. Plus, they're going to get Shohei Ohtani back on the mound after recovering from arm surgery for the past year. So really, a semi-weakness is now a strength for them. I think also all eyes are definitely going to be on Juan Soto after he signed that 15-year, $765 million deal. I mean, that's the biggest contract by far in American sports history. A lot of pressure can be on you, too, there. And also, like the last big remaining free agent, Alex Bregman, where he signs is going to really shift, who's going to be a playoff team and who not. I mean, we hear rumors of who it could be, but he is the last remaining domino, so I think all eyes are on him right now and where his decision's at.
Well, looking at the NBA, today is one of just 4 days when all 30 teams are in action. As you look at the matchups, what are you most looking forward to?
Lakers versus Jazz for one thing. This will be Luka Doncic's second game with the Lakers. He debuted with them Monday night, played only 24 minutes, scored 14 points, which is half of his season average. But of course, that was his first game since December because of a leg injury. I'm really interested to see how he and LeBron James can coexist together. So they play Utah tonight. Also, Jimmy Butler and his new team, Golden State Warriors, they're at Dallas. Butler scored 20 or more points in both his games with his new teams, and they've won both. Meanwhile, Dallas is not expected to have center Anthony Davis, who they got for Luka Doncic because Davis is injured. And the Dallas crowd, this is where they're playing at. The Dallas crowd has been very vocal about their unhappiness about Luka getting traded to begin with. Plus, finally, we've got the Denver Nuggets tonight. They may be the hottest team in the league. They've won 7 straight games. The center, Nikola Jokic, has averaged a triple-double this month. He's actually averaging a triple-double this season. He's probably the front runner to win his 4th MVP award. So they host the Portland Trail Blazers tonight.
Well, Davis Alves, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
As Valentine's Day nears, Ecuadorian flower farmers are hustling to meet export demands from the United States and Europe. February 14th will mark one of the busiest days for the floral industry. Let's take a look at the preparations.
Workers at Sacha Rose are busy picking and packaging top-quality Ecuadorian roses destined for Valentine's Day celebrations. In the capital, Quito, floriculturist Felipe Bustamante says his country provides the world with top-notch flowers.
Definitely the Ecuadorian rose is the best in the world. I say so for the size it has, for the length of its stem, and for the size of its head. It is the largest in the world, and that is because it has grown several meters above sea level.
According to the Ministry of Production, Foreign Trade, Investments and Fisheries, flowers are among Ecuador's main exports. Valentine's Day tests the nation's florists and cargo services every year.
This is the peak season for cargo movement due to the Valentine's Day holiday. Our main trading partners, the United States and Europe, have the good habit of receiving many flowers these days, so capacity is doubled, airline operations are doubled, and also the production of the farms.
Airport Communication Manager Luis Galarraga expects several busy days.
This year, we foresee a growth in terms of export volumes in the Valentine's Day season of between 3 and 5%. Considering that last year the volume exported was over 26,000 metric tons, then we hope to achieve this growth of between 3 and 5%.
Couples will celebrate Valentine's Day Friday, February 14th. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.